Well, here it is. I have finally got my hands on a Miyoo Mini. Now, these things have been around for a while now, but they have always been very hard to get hold of, hence me only just having one now. The question is, was it worth the wait? And after all this time, is it still relevant? Okay, so this is the Miyoo Mini. To give it its full title, this is actually the Miyoo Mini V4. They've actually named these pretty well. Miyoo Mini, it's got a nice bit of alliteration to it, kind of tells you that it's going to be small and it's memorable. A lot of the other manufacturers could really take note from that with things like Powkiddy RGB20SX or the Anbernic RG35XX SP. Miyoo Mini is definitely much more memorable. But anyway, onto the console itself. Now, this thing caused quite a stir when it was first released. It is a tiny, it's about the same size as a pack of cards, a tiny little handheld console that emulates lots of other retro devices in a really nice, compact, functional package. There were other devices that were out before it that were handheld emulators, but it's kind of like, if you think about, there were other MP3 players available before the iPod came along. This really did have quite an impact, and arguably it kick-started that whole trend in all of the sort of flooded market that we've got at the moment of regular weekly, monthly releases of different handheld emulators. So this is really quite an influential little piece. But because there are a lot of other things that have come along since, what I was curious about now I finally got my hands on one is, do the other ones make lots of improvements and has this been a little bit left behind? But I really wanted to try one out. I've wanted one for a while. So when I saw it was available on AliExpress for a decent price, and I'll leave a link in the description, although those prices do fluctuate, as does stock availability, I had to try it out. So I got one ordered, I forgot all about it, and then I got a random package turn up, wondering what it was. Felt like there was nothing in it. This is an extremely lightweight little handheld. I've been testing it out since I got it, and I'm thrilled with it. It is really, really good. So it's not perfect. As I've said before, none of these things are. There's always a caveat with each different one. But on the whole, it works really well for me. And the drawbacks, there are actually some other advantages I've got from other consoles I own. So a little bit of background information, if you have been living under a rock and not heard of this thing before. When this released, it did cause a stir. It was in huge demand, and I don't think they anticipated that demand. As a result, it sold out very quickly. And although they were trying to keep up with demand, it seems that the screens that they were using, sort of the supplies dried up. I think it was screens from a BlackBerry or something like that, probably. Usually the screens are sourced from elsewhere. And if they're making loads of these consoles and the screens all get used up, but they're not being made anymore, they kind of run out. And then they're stuck in a situation where there is a huge demand for these things, but they can't actually make them. So the Miyoo Mini went through a few different versions before it was followed up with this thing here, which I did get hold of when it released, which is the Miyoo Mini Plus. Again, pretty aptly named. It's a larger size version of the Miyoo Mini with pretty much all the same features. A bit weightier as well. It's got a larger size screen, which was the main reason for them making it, really, because they could get their hands on these screens and then they could adapt the hardware to fit with it. It works in pretty much the same way. It's got the same control layout and everything, but this has Wi-Fi, which you might not think is particularly relevant for a retro gaming handheld, but being able to do things like OTA updates, where you can actually just update it over Wi-Fi. You can use a separate operating system. I did this on my original review of the Miyoo Mini Plus. The operating system, Onion OS, is absolutely brilliant. These are great handhelds anyway, but with Onion OS installed on there are features that make these just head and shoulders above so many of the other handhelds on the market. But being able to have Wi-Fi and to update these things without having to connect to a computer is great. Now, this is one of the things. It's like, I already own the Miyoo Mini Plus. Was it really worth getting the Miyoo Mini as well? Well, it's quite nice if you already own this one. If you've already got Onion OS installed and configured on this console, you can simply do what I did and pop the SD card out and put it in your Miyoo Mini. And I was very pleased when I booted it up that it just loaded up seamlessly. There were no issues at all. All of my game saves and everything else were intact. And yeah, it's a really nice way of doing things. So I'm just simply swapping the SD card between the two on whichever one I want to play. Now, the big advantage there is, the one drawback of this, and I mean one, there are so many things about it that I love, and I'm going to go into detail on the things that I think really set it apart in a bit. But the one drawback is it doesn't have Wi-Fi. I think if this had Wi-Fi, it would be pretty much perfect. as a portable console, but it doesn't. So in order to update it, you would need to take your SD card out, connect to a computer and do the updates that way, unless you're on one of these, because you can take the SD card out of this, swap it into this one, do all of your updates on Onion OS, and then swap it back to here. So that is definitely an advantage for me, but it's not the end of the world. If you don't have the other console, you can do all of your updates just connecting to a computer. In terms of actually using it, now this gets the basics right, and I think that is crucial. The Analog Pocket Anodized Aluminium Edition that I got a little while ago is a gorgeous console. It's a really premium piece of kit. However, it's actually let down a little bit by the controls, by the accuracy of the button inputs and the D-pad inputs, and it's still a great console, but that disappointed me a bit. With this, the controls are so good and snappy and responsive, to the extent that when I tried to do a little bit of comparison and I loaded up my Powkiddy RGB20SX and tried to play some similar games, I was surprised at just how kind of mushy the D-pad and buttons felt on, let's not forget, a console that I'm really fond of and I've played loads on. After a few days of playing on this, I got so used to the button inputs just being so responsive. I think it's largely down to the silicon membranes that are between the buttons and the motherboard, but the response is great. The level of pressure, you get a good little bit of feedback from it, but yeah, just when I tried other consoles, it felt like there was a lot more travel. There was a lot more sort of squish in terms of the buttons. This just feels great. The buttons themselves are a sort of very high gloss finish. They feel really nice to use. The only negatives in terms of controls, well, first of all, it is very small. Like, it's about the same size as a pack of cards. So if you've got larger hands, it might be a bit uncomfortable to use. I was quite surprised, actually. Long periods of gaming on Tetris, Magical Drop, little puzzle games that I'll just sit and play for hours. My hands weren't feeling crampy at all in the way that they sometimes do playing on something like a Game Boy Micro or even Game Boy Advance SP. This actually feels pretty good. The rear buttons are a little bit odd. I'd say that the two main drawbacks for me, the rear buttons and the lack of Wi-Fi. Everything else I cannot fault at all. They are very responsive, which kind of sounds good, but you can kind of accidentally knock them because they're not in your line of sight. And if you're holding this quite small console, your fingers can accidentally knock those bits. So I kind of changed my color palette in Tetris sometimes while I was playing and things like that. I thought they might be quite high up because the console's smaller, but when I compare it with the Miyoo Mini Plus, the buttons on that, the shoulder buttons, are a little lower down. Now, I think they have upgraded the design quite a bit. These are much better, a bit more of a solid feel. These feel a little bit flimsy, a little bit lightweight, but they do kind of sit out of the way. And once you get used to holding the console a different way, it's not really an issue. And I think them being high up is probably largely due to giving it enough room to have the battery in there as well. It is a minor gripe, but to be honest with this thing, I'm looking for gripes. It didn't come in a box, which is great for sustainability. It actually came in a carry case, as you got here. The carry case has a nice sort of soft padded internals where the console fits in really neatly without falling out if you turn it upside down, but it doesn't seem to scuff or bump up the sides or anything. And there's a little mesh pocket at the side there where you can put like your Wi-Fi dongle, your USB cable, and maybe a polishing cloth in there for the screen. So yeah, really nice little case that it came with, and that's pretty much it. And it's got everything that you need in that little package. I've been using this a lot this week. It is so small and portable. Even when it's in the carry case, I can just chuck it into my bag, play it on lunch times at work, take it out with me if I'm shopping, and just sit down and have a bit of a break, have a coffee and play on this. It seems silly, like it's not significantly smaller than, say, the Miyoo Mini Plus. It's certainly a bit smaller than the V10 Powkiddy console I got a little while ago, especially width-wise. And Anbernics SP is kind of comparable in terms of pocketability. But I don't know, there's something about it that just makes me feel like it's fine to just chuck it in a pocket and get it out and play. And this is where I get on to what I think is the main advantage of the Miyoo Mini and largely Onion OS. So as I said, I have many other emulator handhelds, but there are a couple of features of this, and really it's features of Onion OS that really make this a winner for me, particularly in terms of that pick up and play portability side of things. Okay, so there are two features of this operating system that I love. The first one is when I am playing a game. So let's say, for example, I'll just go onto Game Boy here and load up Atomic Punk, for instance. I am in my game there, but But if I just press the menu button, it brings up a new sort of menu screen where I can scroll left and right between all of my recently played games and their settings and save states saved in there. And then I can just simply launch that and it will pick up the game at exactly the same point I left off. And then if I press the button again to come out of it, I can go through and it will, as I press the button, it will save the state of the game. So it's like you're just dipping in and out of these games without having to worry about losing any progress at all. Even if you're like halfway through a level and you haven't saved anything, you pick up exactly where that left off. That is a really, really nice feature. The other one is, if I am, let's say I'm in the middle of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 here, but I need to go and do something else and I won't be able to come back to it for a while, I can press and hold the power button on top, and what it will do is it will save the state of the game and shut down, which means, again, I don't need to worry about losing any progress. But the thing I really like is if I press and hold power again and boot up my console, what it will do is obviously it'll go through all the usual boot screens and everything else, but when it actually loads up, it will pick up where I left off. It will boot straight to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, exactly on the pause screen I was on before, and I can unpause and I can carry on. For me, those two features make this such a great little portable device, and that is thanks to Onion OS. The operating system that comes on this is okay, but if you get a Miyoo Mini, or if you get a Miyoo Mini Plus, definitely get an SD card set up with Onion OS. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Out of all the consoles I own, I think this is the best firmware, operating system, whatever you want to call it, that I can get on one of these things, and it makes it feel like one of the best handhelds as a result. So as I said before, this one is the V4, the fourth version of the Miyoo Mini. They've been through various different subtle iterations, but largely it's the same thing. The big advantage for me on the V4 is you can get a yellow one, and as we know, I do love a yellow console. But another advantage of this is that although they all have a USB-C port for charging, the earlier versions had to be plugged into a USB-A connector at the other end. You had to have the sort of lower charge rate. If you were to accidentally plug it into power delivery, which is where you've got slightly higher voltage, it would kill your screen. So you could like pretty much destroy your console if you accidentally plugged it into the wrong charger. I'm the sort of person that would definitely accidentally plug it into the wrong charger. So the fact that I know that this is safe regardless of what charger I plug into it, that is a big difference for me. Now, I mentioned earlier about the screens and that they couldn't make these anymore because they ran out of screens. This is actually a different screen, and you can read for hours and hours with people arguing on Reddit as to which is the best and why the original screen is better, because that's got like a pixel perfect resolution. This one's a higher resolution, so it has to be adapted slightly to display the screen. For most people, the only information you need to know is this screen looks great. I think when the V4 originally came out, there were some issues with how the screen looked, but they've done updates since to it. And now, honestly, to me, like I've got loads of these things, including the Analog Pocket, which looks absolutely sublime. This looks great. The size of the screen is good. There's hardly any bezel on it at all. So even though it's a tiny, tiny little console, the screen's pretty big. It's not too much of a strain on the eye when you're playing. Sound-wise, it's pretty good. I've not even tried it with headphones yet because the speaker's pretty good. One of the things I was most excited about with the sound, though, is it's actually got a volume dial, like a proper little dial to turn it up and down like you'd have on the original Game Boys and things. Generally, that is absolutely redundant these days. Most consoles, even the Miyoo Mini Plus, have an up and down button to adapt it, and I was surprised at just how nice it was to have the tactile sort of scrolling potentiometer of the up and down on the volume dial. That's a feature that I really like, and that's a feature that I think makes it better than the Miyoo Mini Plus. So, I mean, if you're torn between these two, I think if you're a practically minded person, the Miyoo Mini Plus is a better bet. It's got a bigger screen, it's more comfortable to hold, it's got Wi-Fi so you can update it, it's still pretty cheap, and it's generally much more easily available. This can be hard to get your hands on. It's smaller, so it is more portable, but maybe not as comfortable to hold. The display's not as big, it doesn't have Wi-Fi. So yeah, the sensible option is the Miyoo Mini Plus, but it is a portable games console. So the smaller it is, the more portable it is. the better it is. So, you know, your mileage may vary. Obviously, if you're stupid like me and you buy both, you're actually getting the best of both worlds and you're very fortunate. But if you're having to make the choice between the two, I don't think there is actually the right choice. I think it depends on your needs. Certainly for convenience, practicality, value for money, the Plus is better. But for portability, cuteness, and just the fact that it's just awesome. It's hard to put into words how amazing it is to have generations worth of games playable in such an easy, straightforward, and intuitive way on such a portable console that it's got no right to be this comfortable to play on in that size. I said at the beginning, was it worth the wait? And, you know, is it still relevant? Well, there have been so many other consoles that have come out since, and I still find myself recommending people when they're asking me about what's the best one to get. I still find myself recommending the Miyoo Mini Plus or the Miyoo Mini. Now I've actually tried out the Miyoo Mini, I would still continue to say that for most emulation up to and including PlayStation, this is still going to be hard to beat. I've got a lot of these things. Buying another one is always a silly thing to do, but I am really, really glad I did. I'm glad I finally own one of these, and I'm also glad that it hasn't let me down. It hasn't disappointed me. But I am hugely fond of the Miyoo Mini Plus. I did a few videos about that when I first got it, so if you want to check out my initial review of that, I will link it up here. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers. Bye.